Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Wrestlenomics Radio. I'm Brandon Thurston, broadcasting live and on demand from Buffalo, New York, where today is Sunday, June 18th, Father's Day. This is our follow-up episode to our Mother's Day episode, and I'm joined by Jesse Collings. Hello. Hello, Jesse Collings.
Sorry.
Hello.
I think there was a brief delay there.
Okay. And I want to say a special hello to Chris Gullo, as I was bombarded this week on both Dynamite and Collision broadcasts. Admittedly, I did not tune into Rampage. Could have been airing during Rampage too, but in our local market of Buffalo, New York, I was immersed in advertisements for Gullo's Garden Center. Is this your are you, in the interest of full disclosure, Chris Gullo, are you buying advertising during AEW broadcasts?
I am not buying advertising during AEW broadcasts. I am not affiliated with Gullo's Garden Center as an employee or anything like that. Now, it is owned by my uncle, my mom's brother. So, like, it is in the family, but I have no ties to Gullo's Garden Center.
Okay, can you send him an invoice? Because we have calls to action here on the screen right now for people watching live on YouTube. The website and the phone number are there if you want to do business with the Garden Center. There it is. But you're a big gardener.
Yeah. It's a garden center. They have a landscaping company too. So
I thought we were gonna have like our own little mini segment each week on the show called Hello Gullo, and Gullo, we just slapped that background around Gullo, and he tells us a story about his life for like 2 minutes.
Yes.
Yeah. No one's ever said hello Gullos until my aunt, who probably came up with that slogan, I'm assuming. So yeah.
Well, it does rhyme.
It does, but it's not a word. Hello is not a word.
Well, we're going to talk today about the debut. Not that much to say yet because the ratings aren't out, but the debut of AEW Collision, as well as the report from the New York Post that FX is interested in WWE Live rights, as well as some ratings things, looking at the long-term ratings of WWE in particular, and the MLW versus WWE lawsuit must continue. We will explain that as well. But first, we'll do some housekeeping. Once again, if you haven't listened to last week's episode, Wrestlenomics Radio, this podcast that you're listening to right now, will become Patreon exclusive 3 or 4 weeks out of each month, beginning in July. So the July 9th episode will be the first episode that is exclusive to subscribers at patreon.com/Wrestlenomics. And we'll continue to have the first episode of each month will continue to be free on the platform that you're listening to or watching right now. But other than that, they will be exclusive to Patreon. Still in the Wrestlenomics Radio podcast feed and in the YouTube channel, there will continue to be the Pollock and Thurston podcast. That is a collaboration of Wrestlenomics and Post Wrestling. So that will continue to be free. We just had this past... When did we release it? Wednesday. It was recorded on Monday. John Pollock's and mine talk with Tony Khan, which we can probably talk about as well today. Jesse, I know you've listened to it. Your analysis.
I was interested in it for sure. I definitely think there's a lot of... It's a Tony Khan interview, so there's a lot of him going into promoter mode.
It was a great show. It was a great interview. Sorry.
No, I mean, I thought, he definitely... It's a really bad time for a car alarm to be going off. Hold on.
As is someone burglarizing a car in Boston. But we can touch on last night on AEW Collision. CM Punk said that... What is his line? David Zaslav, who's pictured here for people watching live on YouTube. David Zaslav... calls him
one Bill Phil.
One Bill Phil. Big CM Punk fan, David Zaslav, I suppose. But it raises some questions. But what were your thoughts on the interview, Jesse?
I thought, it's one of my big takeaway, honestly, is that Tony...
I did a good job, right? I did good? Did I do okay?
I thought that you and John did an excellent job asking the questions that you could ask and trying to get something out of Tony that you don't see him get out of, say, the Wrestling podcast he did earlier this week with, I think it's Barstool, right? And some of the other podcasts you see. It was funny. I was thinking about, like one of like the things Tony does during that interview is anytime he's asked about a question about CM Punk potentially feuding with the Elite, Tony turns into this monologue about, oh well, he's feuding with Samoa Joe, his longtime rival Samoa Joe this Saturday, and then CM Punk comes out on Saturday for Collision. He's wrestling Samoa Joe later that night. And does he mention Samoa Joe in his opening promo? Absolutely not. He takes shots at the Elite instead.
What was he talking? I didn't understand any of that promo. I don't know what exactly he was talking about. He was talking about David Zaslav, who's maybe David Zaslav will be his manager soon on television. That would be interesting. Not really sure. He's just been missing because of an injury primarily, only.
Right. There's well, I mean that's true. He has only been missing because of an injury. If he wasn't injured, he would have been on the show much more recently. He would have never missed time. He'd be the AEW World Champion if he wasn't injured.
Yes.
You must believe that.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, if you wanted to get into his promo, I mean, it's going to be a week by week thing. I don't know. I think like in a vacuum, his promo was compelling, but I don't really know what it means for the direction of his character. I don't really know what it means for the direction of his feuding with the Elite. Perhaps that's intentionally by design, that we're supposed to want to keep tuning in each week. I thought that there was a kind of a representative disconnect between his match later that night and who he was supposed to be feuding with, the Bullet Club Gold and Samoa Joe, and what he was actually saying, which seemed to be implying feuds with both the Elite and MJF coming up.
Yes, a real life feud, and a worked pro wrestling feud. I guess those are two different things. So we can look at the WrestleTix number, the estimate of tickets distributed that we have for this event at the United Center, the same location of the second Rampage where CM Punk made his return to pro wrestling after 7 years of absence. This is Saturday night, 9,203. 9,203. I sort of speculated maybe it could get up to 10,000, but falling short of that. 9,203 is the latest number. I imagine WrestleTix may have a final count. This is not a final count, but this is as of yesterday afternoon-ish, I believe. So not a great number, but it's certainly far better than any of the other Collision numbers that are out there so far. Next week is Toronto. Be interesting to see what the crowd reaction is in Toronto away from Chicago. But the night before Forbidden Door, where that event is going to have more than 10,000 people at it, it's going to be virtually sold out in the Scotiabank Arena. 2,523 for the Saturday night Collision. So I don't know, a quarter of the audience will be in attendance, it looks like, for that one.
Yeah, so the first thing, talking about this Collision taping in Chicago, I think it's a testament to CM Punk's drawing power in the city of Chicago. I know people might see that 9,200 number and say, well, they didn't sell at the United Center like they did 2 years ago or whatever, but I don't think anyone really realistically thought that was an expectation that they could hit. I think if you look at it just in a vacuum, it's AEW's largest attendance this year so far, I believe. I believe it is has an outside chance of probably being their largest attendance in the United States this year. Which shows are going to be that we don't have a maybe All Out, maybe Full Gear, perhaps Grand Slam, which I don't think they've announced yet, but I'd be surprised if they weren't doing Grand Slam.
You're saying this is the highest attendance for AEW so far this year?
I think that's right, isn't it?
No, Double or Nothing. Let me look. I'm looking now.
Did Double or Nothing cost 10,000?
Certainly up there. Double or Nothing WrestleTix as at 10,550.
Okay.
Now, maybe that's with comps. It's, I don't know. That's a pretty big difference, though. 9,200 versus 10,500.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was discounting that Double. I'm discounting the late sales for Double or Nothing. In my mind, Double or Nothing was still at like the 8,500 mark, but
it is higher than Revolution though at 8,900.
Yeah, so let's say second highest, for a television taping, not for a pay-per-view. Probably not a lot of fly-in fans for this Collision. Maybe there was some, but probably not as much as there would be for Double or Nothing.
Yeah, as far as other TVs that are high, I've got Winnipeg 7,400 if you round it in March.
Yeah, and there was like the Seattle show, which is probably close to this number.
You are right. 9,121 for Seattle on January 4th.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Englewood, 9,636 for Englewood on January
Okay.
11th. So that would be the next highest
Yeah.
TV. And this would be higher than that by a slight margin.
Probably. Well, so I think that's a success. I think if I was looking at the show going forward, what is holding Collision back? Why are some of these ticket sales, I think, disappointing? I think a primary thing would be a concern about Collision just feeling like a B show, feeling like it's not as important as Dynamite, feeling like Rampage, feeling like a show that people can skip and they're not going to miss anything. And what I'll say about last night's show was that it was a show where stuff happens, right? CM Punk returned, cut his big promo, had a big match in the main event. They had a title change between, Wardlow and Luchasaurus / Christian. I don't know how that's going to shake out, but there was a title change. They had the return. Yep, they had returning matches with, Andrade coming back, Miro coming back. So it did definitely, at least for 1 week, felt like a major show where stuff happened and felt like it had, had a really great crowd. Obviously, they were really into CM Punk. He got giant pop when he came out. So it felt like an important show that you had to watch if you're an AEW fan and you want to stay in the loop. Whether or not it stays that way, it's gonna be week by week. We have no idea what it's gonna look like in a few weeks, in a few months. But I do think I do think the show on Saturday sets a positive note and perhaps maybe helps contribute to stronger ticket sales for Collision over the next 6 or 7 weeks, because in that, at least for 1 week so far, has felt like a really important show that fans should need to see.
Yeah, I think Lavi Margolin on Twitter raised the point that it'd be interesting to see if they continue to book large-scale hockey-sized arenas like the Prudential Center. If they're it's currently the Prudential Center is the highest Collision event that is yet to take place, 4,500. I imagine it'll be a little bit higher. Let's say it gets to 5,000 or 6,000. Do you need to be booking the Prudential Center if you want to run it in Newark? Is there not a smaller venue that would cost less? So it'll be interesting to see Dynamite for that matter, if they continue to always book these basketball, hockey, NHL, NBA venues.
Yeah, and obviously the Scotiabank Arena is a very large NBA, NHL sized arena in Toronto. I believe the Saddle Dome also is around the same size as those other buildings.
The Flames.
We've talked about the First Ontario Center. I think it's a little bit smaller than
Cops Coliseum.
Yeah, I think it's like 10,000 capacity or something like that. The Brand Center is a more typical Dynamite sized building. I think it's like 6,500 or something for attendance. Mm-hmm. So you see kind of a mix on here as far as the size of the buildings. But they have not been deterred by, lower Dynamite ticket sales. They're still, running more of those NBA sized arenas. I know they're coming to Boston, the TD Garden. They were in Washington, D.C. For this, this past Wednesday, right? They were in Washington, D.C.
Yes. Yeah.
And they ran the Capital One Arena, which is the NBA arena in that city. And they had previously been in a much smaller venue. I think they were in like a 3,500 seat venue for the last few times they had been in Washington, D.C. So they're not deterred by, they feel like being in those big buildings, even if they're only doing, 4,000, 5,000 fans, is still worth it to them.
So if I share this one, this shows that Dynamite, according to WrestleTix numbers, is averaging in Q2 to date, which is we're almost done with Q2. Can you believe it? 5,000 is the average currently for Dynamite tapings, which is last quarter Q1 was 5,600. Quarter before that in Q4 was at 4,300. So it's kind of a decline if you look back to Q3 2021, where they averaged almost 7,000, and that would include Arthur Ashe, a big Newark show, I believe a big Long Island show. But it is coming down to around the 5,000 range here for Dynamite.
Mm-hmm. And you look at it, in a lot of ways, a lot of the ticket sale fluctuation can be based on how frequently they've been to a market. I think you look at part of the issue, I think, with Q4 of 2022 was that they were running in a lot of markets they had run a lot before. I know they were in Boston, they were in like Philadelphia, they were in Pittsburgh, they were in a lot of the markets that they've been in several times, if I recall correctly. Um, and then in quarter one of this year, one of the reasons I think attendance was up was because they hit a lot of markets they hadn't been in. We already mentioned some of them, right? The big Winnipeg show, the big Seattle show. They were in Inglewood, California for only the second time. That helped, I think, quarter one really, boost up their attendance. Quarter two, we're starting to see, I think, a mix. We saw some first-time markets. We saw them like in San Diego, California. But now they're starting to go back to, I think, the same kind of markets they've been to. And with the addition of Collision, you're now going to theoretically go through your markets at double speed because now you have 2 touring shows instead of 1.
And they're doing a Dynamite in Wintrust Arena in Chicago again already, and then they're probably going to do All Out, I think, in Chicago in September. So it's a lot of Chicago in a short amount of time. In any case, yeah.
What do you think a good strategy for Collision, because you're trying to get it up and running, is to kind of run the smaller college arenas like they did in the beginning of Dynamite, where most of them were those?
Exactly what I'm saying. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Say more about that.
You're creating a new brand, so you have to obviously grow it. And if the majority of arenas are these large arenas, and the attendance numbers, come out and they don't look good because of what you're putting out there, but it's like, hey, we ran mostly 6,000 seat arenas and we're averaging 5,000 seats. That's a lot better than averaging 5,000 seats for mostly running 10,000 seat arenas.
And less expensive, probably.
It's a popularity perception, because people will take any ball they can run with. Like, oh, look, see, AEW's dying in popularity. I don't know. And I'm sure they don't really care about the PR aspect, but
I think there's pros and cons to it. I think most wrestling fans would say, aesthetically, from a viewer experience, I'd rather have like a full building of 5,000 fans than even like 5,500 fans at a 14,000 seat building, right? It's going to sound louder when you have a building full. You can have, you don't have to move everyone to the hard cam side if you're in a large arena. But I also think that AEW does care about the perception, of the sense of, we're a big wrestling company where we want to compete with WWE. We want to be seen as a viable entertainment brand at the level of WWE. That means running the same buildings that WWE runs, even if you maybe are paying more for those buildings than you would be for smaller venues, even if you're maybe aesthetically presenting a more challenging for the viewer experience, because you're going to have a lot of empty seats. But the idea is to make it a big show. I think Collision
is it a bigger show just because it's in a bigger building, even if that building is half full?
I think that's the impression they want to give off. I think that like Collision with like it's going to be the CM Punk show. It's with one Bill Phil. Let me tell you something. One Bill Phil ain't running little college arenas. One Bill Phil is going into the Capital One Arena. He's running the United Center. He's running the Prudential Center in Newark, New Jersey. He's running the Scotiabank Arena. It's the big show with CM Punk, the big star, and they're in the biggest arenas that they can find for that. Whether or not that makes sense, I have no idea from their bottom line perspective. But I do think that the perception is, we're big, we're major league, we're going to run the biggest buildings we can run, even if we're necessarily not filling them. I feel like that's been a strategic change for AEW, and that's why they're in so many of these larger venues.
Okay. So that's the live attendance. More importantly, we will get, not on Tuesday morning, which will be the normal schedule going forward, but this week, because of the Juneteenth holiday, Nielsen ratings are delayed by 1 day, for the most part. And it's going to be available Wednesday morning, the TV rating is. Unless there's a Fast National around there. But I haven't heard anything this morning so far. So the AEW Collision rating should be out on Wednesday morning. So what was the competition last night? Yeah, on NBC broadcast, U.S. Open Golf was on. Fox had baseball with the
No,
Yankees.
it did not. That game was rained out.
Yeah, it was rained out.
Mm-hmm.
Did they play the other game? Because I know some of the Southwest markets had a Padres game, I think.
They might have done that then, but
so what was on Fox last night?
I wasn't watching Fox. I can't tell you. I just know that the Red Sox game was rained out because it was pouring rain.
Chat room, tell us what was on Fox last night if you know. Global Monitor. So something else was on Fox. College World Series on ESPN. UFC Fight Night prelims on ESPN2. So maybe not as tough competition if there was no Yankees Red Sox game being broadcast naturally.
the U.S. Open golf, was that running in prime time at the
Yes,
same time?
because it's in California, I believe. It's in LA.
Okay.
So yeah.
This is what was on the TV guide schedule. So I put out a poll with 4 possible options. What do you think the AEW Collision P18 to 49 TV rating is going to be? 0.25 or lower, 0.26 to 0.29, 0.30 to 0.33, 0.34 or higher. For reference, Dynamite has been doing about a 0.30 in the demo of late. What did it do most recently this past Wednesday? It did a 0.30. Week before that, it did a 0.33. Week before that, it did a 0.29. And the plurality of responses say 0.25 or lower. So I apparently did not provide a set of options that resulted in the most popular choice being the one that was in the middle. What were your guys' predictions last week?
I believe I said a 0.27.
2.7. Okay.
I think it
Gullo
was
said, do you
0.20. Yeah.
0.20.
Yeah, I was
Doom.
a hater.
Gullo says doom for AEW.
It's Saturday nights, man, and you know.
Let me ask both of you, like I guess Gullo first.
Yes.
Just yesterday, like leading up to the show, and maybe when the show was on, and maybe when the show was over, just like, did you get the vibe that like people were really interested in Collision, like on social media and things like that? Did you feel like Collision felt like
What
this
was the
episode
vibe
of
meter?
Collision felt like a big deal?
Honestly, not as much as a Dynamite. No, I mean, I checked Twitter to especially see what people were saying about CM Punk and stuff, but it seemed a lot less busy, especially from your typical people that tweet about wrestling, like on a Dynamite. It didn't seem as active. I mean, I'm not following everybody, and there's some people I'd rather not follow, but it just didn't seem as active as like on a Wednesday night.
Yeah.
Talking
What about you,
specifically
Brandon?
about AEW.
I did have thoughts along these lines of raising my Bible meter antenna. It's a far cry. It's not saying much, but it's a far cry from Punk's return in August 2021. What's the question exactly?
Like, what was kind of the vibe you got from social media and wherever else you're witnessing,
As far as like social
or
media
seeing
and
wrestling
Twitter,
fans
I
talk
guess
about things?
I would say this was more than a Dynamite. I don't know if that's indicative of a rating though.
Well, yeah, I know. Obviously, I don't know what the rating is going to be. I felt like I got the vibe that this felt like a big deal. It felt almost like a kind of like an AEW pay-per-view in some sense. Maybe it's just because it was on the weekend, but I felt like people were really interested in seeing CM Punk and really interested in seeing what he was going to say. Doesn't necessarily mean anything long-term for Collision, but I thought that Collision in general was a success in the debut episode of Collision felt like an important thing that you should be watching, I guess. And I think that's a positive vibe just, for Collision and also for, this rating, whatever it's going to be. I feel like it's probably at the level of at least a Dynamite. So I would say I'm probably a little low with a 0.27. I wouldn't be surprised if it's higher, but maybe we'll all learn a lesson on how difficult it is for them to do a rating on Saturday nights.
For what it's worth, if we go into Google Trends and just isolate the United States and look over the past 7 days, at 8 o'clock, I'm looking at the past 7 days, so that includes Dynamite on Wednesday and Saturday night last night, and we get the peak for Wednesday for AEW is at 9 o'clock, where it did about 58% of what the peak was for Saturday. So it was, it means that when Collision started, searches related to AEW were almost double that of the highest hour during Wednesday night. Does that mean anything for a rating? I don't know, but it's encouraging. Because if the rating was going to be terrible, you would not see more web search interest, right? Than Wednesday night, I would think. But I guess that's encouraging. We'll see what the number is, though. What do these ratings on Saturday usually do for the broader television landscape? We've got the last 2 Saturdays here from Showbuzz on the screen, and the last 2 Saturdays had a Stanley Cup Finals game on TNT, which did a 0.58 and a 0.50. That's obviously not the case now. Stanley Cup Finals are over. So we've got the UFC prelims last Saturday. PPV prelims did a 0.40. Top Rank Boxing did a 0.22. So I would, anything above a 0.20 is probably going to be in the top 5 to win. This is just cable original, so not including anything that was on broadcast. ESPN College World Series is probably gonna. Is there anything else out there? Is there news? I can't imagine the competition among the Showbuzz cable originals in the demo is going to be that tough. If it's above a 0.3, it could be number one.
Yeah, I mean, there's really no scripted television competition on Saturdays, especially in the summertime.
Yeah.
That's just not going to be a night that's going to have it. Sports, absolutely, but the sports is going to vary. You know, there'll be nights where there'll be NASCAR races in the summer on Saturday nights. That will probably be on cable. UFC, like prelims and stuff like that, might be a consistent competitor. But like you said, like there's going to be no Stanley Cup finals, so you could take that right out. There was, there's Formula One, like qualifying and stuff like that. I see Formula One qualifying is here on the June 3rd.
And that would be on
3rd.
ESPN, right? And so what was on ESPN? So. What was on ESPN last night was what was in the slide there. UFC Fight Night prelims and College World Series. So I don't think there's any Formula One to go up against.
Right, and the College World Series,
unless it was earlier in the day.
And the College World Series isn't going to be consistent throughout the summer either. It's going to be wrapping up pretty soon.
So what time do the Formula One races are earlier in the day? So I might be completely wrong.
But I believe they were in Canada for this race. Usually, you know, if they're in Europe or Asia, they're obviously going to be in earlier time slots. But I believe since the race was in Canada, I don't know if it was a race or a qualifying or whatever. But this week, I believe they're in Canada, so it's maybe in a more prime time or a late afternoon slot.
Okay. Well, anyway, if you're waiting for the wrestling discourse, the ratings discourse, excuse me, Wednesday afternoon, there will be an episode of Pollock and Thurston. We will be talking just after the rating is out, presumably, unless there's some Nielsen technical delays. But we should have a AEW Collision rating in hand on Wednesday afternoon, as we will be joined by, I believe, Jesse's very own uncle, Dave Meltzer. So we will be talking, the three of us, about the Wednesday rating, or I'm sorry, the Collision rating, and whatever else is in the wrestling business news by that time. So
I have a funny Dave story I'll tell off air.
You just enrage the chat, enrage all viewers now. So anyway, by the way, if you want to participate today with the super chat, you're more than welcome to, and we will respond to your question or your comment if you're watching live on YouTube. In other news, according to Andrew Marchand of the New York Post, he had a report this week saying that the headline is "Why FX is a Contender for WWE's Broadcast Rights." And I have some notes here from Andrew Marchand's report here. He writes that the WWE, the World Wrestling Entertainment, has finished its exclusive negotiating window with Fox and Comcast/USA Network without a deal. The Post has learned. That's not surprising, though, he goes on to say, and the incumbents, which is Fox and NBCU/USA Network, the incumbents remain the favorites. There's a $1 million man, Ted DiBiase, quote in the story. Thank you, Andrew. One party that does have interest in adding the WWE is Disney. According to sources, the potential cable placement would not be ESPN, but rather FX. Besides FX, the biggest new player could be Amazon Prime Video, something we've talked about here on this program a number of times. He goes on to say, the reason FX makes more sense than ESPN is ESPN can't guarantee a night of the week to WWE. And he goes on to say, Nick Khan has a strong relationship with Jimmy Pitaro, who is the ESPN chairman, as well as the ESPN president of content, Burke Magnus. And of course, there's a connection between Disney/ESPN, between Endeavor/UFC, which WWE is obviously merging with sometime this year, probably. One nugget, here it is, one nugget that Andrew Marchand was told was that may interest wrestling fans is that Warner Brothers Discovery does not have to stay exclusive to AEW. It would be something if it got in on WWE, but he doesn't even see that. He also mentioned Appel as a dark horse along with WBD. So FX, I'm disappointed in myself for not realizing FX was a possibility here. We've talked about ESPN a number of times, and I've said, ESPN is not going to fit in WWE for 52 weeks a year. ESPN2 maybe, but ESPN2 is a lower powered network. Maybe FX is a good alternative. Jesse's frozen in time. You have a thought, Gullo?
Yeah. So first off, over the
sick.
years, just broke up a little bit. I'll
Finish
just
your
over,
single.
yeah, over the years, how many times have we heard that? Oh, FX is interested in wrestling. Now, granted, they were owned by Fox most of those times.
Have you heard that before? I mean, you may know more than I have.
I mean, WCW towards the end,
WCW.
that was
Really?
a big thing. Bischoff was trying to get a deal there, and then I feel like when SmackDown was bought by Fox, there was like talks of something about like maybe them getting in, trying to get Raw on FX or something. I do remember hearing something about FX in the recent years too, but we've heard that over the years. But just on top of that too, is the household reach very similar to USA?
It's very similar. Yes.
Yeah, I figured it was, but I mean, Disney. I mean, I'm not totally surprised, but I don't know how serious they are.
Yeah.
You know?
And just to clear up the ownership timeline for people, people may think of FX as being a Fox network. That was the case until late last decade, and now it's a Disney network, which was acquired along with 21st Century Fox, a number of other assets. Your thoughts, Jesse?
Who do you think Andrew Marchand's sources are for this story?
I don't source guess on this program.
Right. But I would, when I saw this, I said, well, this very well could be someone in WWE telling Andrew Marchand, oh, yes, these people are interested in this. FX, Amazon Prime. Now, maybe Andrew Marchand is double sourcing and going to.
I would certainly think he has the ability to ask people who would know
FX
outside of
and
WWE.
Amazon Prime.
Yeah.
Right. So that's possible. It's obviously, but realistically, right? WWE, Raw, and SmackDown, if they were to both be on cable or even with SmackDown on network television, are amongst the most highly rated programs of the week, every week that they're on. So it makes perfectly logical sense that they would have many people pursuing them because of how powerful they have emerged as a distinct entity on cable television in terms of being able to consistently be number one every week, 52 weeks a year. FX, to my knowledge, doesn't have any like live sports or live programming really at all. FX is kind of strange in its presentation of its cable network. It's really like a like this. There's really no other network kind of like it to me. It's like almost like a vehicle for their streaming platform in a way. Like
for
Disney
Hulu,
likes. Yeah, Disney, the FX brand, because of some success they've had with prestige television, the FX brand is used almost as in the sense for Hulu branding, which is like FX is going to produce The Bear. FX produces some other shows that are on Hulu.
Oh yeah, it's a very good show. Brandon asked what The Bear was. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's coming. The Bear's coming back like next week or something like that. But they have other shows that I can't think of off the top of my head. But if you go on some of like the most popular shows on Hulu are FX branded shows, and so they kind of like use it as like a prestige drama kind of wing of Disney.
Yeah.
And because Disney Plus is very restrictive on what kind of content they want to put out there, they want it to basically all be family friendly. That's why Hulu has some sort of value to Disney still, because it's basically a place where they can park mature content that is still valuable to them. And FX is kind of the brand for that. FX has all their TVMA shows. So if WWE were to be affiliated with Disney in some capacity, if they didn't want to have pro wrestling, even WWE's relatively family-friendly presentation of pro wrestling associated with the Disney brand or even the ESPN brand, FX does make sense as a similar kind of entity to, like, say, USA or TBS or TNT to put that kind of content on there. And like I said, FX doesn't have any really thing on the network like a live wrestling show or live sports, but obviously being affiliated with Disney and certainly with ESPN, they have the capacity to do that. It wouldn't be impossible for the company to be able to produce a live. They wouldn't be learning on the fly, is what I guess I mean.
Yeah, and so the coverage is about the same between, say, FX and any other top cable network, which is I believe according to sports TV ratings on Twitter, we're at about 74 million homes or so that have cable in the United States out of like 120 million or something like that.
Yeah.
So
I know, like on, like on every cable package that I've ever had access to, like FX, USA, TBS, and TNT are all like right in a row. They're all very similar, like kind of standard basic cable packages, channels.
So I think, over the years, the WWE content has pretty much proven that, when they change networks, whether it's, USA has pretty much always had Raw, with the exception of the time where they were on TNN with Viacom, but SmackDown has jumped around quite a bit. So I think there's a pretty good chance that nearly 100% of the viewership will transfer. The viewership rankings, according to Variety's end of the year postings, the viewership rankings that separate, say, USA Network and FX is pretty wide. This is for prime time, is what they measure. But a lot of that is overwhelmingly driven by Raw and to some extent NXT. So how much of that difference, I think it's something like 700,000 viewers is what USA averages in prime time versus like something like 400,000 for FX in prime time. So I could see the majority, at least, of that difference being driven by WWE content. So if you took, which I doubt, I think it's the less likely case, but if you took Raw away from USA Network and put it on FX, I think, a lot of that difference would transfer. SmackDown seems like the more likely option, but still a lot of that difference would transfer if you took it off of Fox and onto FX.
What about just NXT? What if Nick Khan's trying to sell the media rights for NXT separately, and maybe that's something FX gets?
Maybe, but I think that the play, why this would make sense for FX is, Chris Gullo, where do cable networks especially get the majority of their revenue?
It's subscriptions.
The big ones. So and I guess, as you guys pointed out, FX has maybe no live content, no sports. So I'd imagine that FX, unlike maybe the USA Network, definitely TNT and TBS, FX is probably not driving a lot of carriage revenue for carriage fees for cable systems to carry FX. But if they had a really popular TV show that was live and they were a more highly ranked network, they could probably drive more carriage fees. So I don't think NXT will suffice for that strategy. You've got to have Raw or SmackDown that's going to help your carriage fees. If you can enhance an area of revenue for this network that is probably close to non-existent. So that's why I think it would make sense. And in WWE's case, the big question for SmackDown, and we've discussed, is that Fox is maybe not that interested. Endeavor executives felt it was important enough to tell their investors that Fox might not bid strongly, something to that effect. Fox might not bid strongly for SmackDown, so just be prepared for that. So if that's the case, what's going to drive that price up is at least another competitive bid. Is that going to come from Amazon Prime Video? Maybe. The risk with Amazon Prime Video is you're taking one of your core shows and putting it onto a platform that's going to have a lot lower reach. Despite the fact that, yes, there are probably 80 million homes or something like that have Amazon Prime, it's still not a very strong network, as evidenced by the pretty good, but still not comparable, well behind the TV ratings that the NFL games did on Thursday night on Amazon Prime. They were well behind what the other NFL games are doing on traditional TV. The safety of being on Fox is that on FX is that you're still on a pretty strong traditional TV network that's going to have strong reach, that's going to help your downstream businesses, such as ticket sales, such as sponsorships and things like that, consumer products. So it makes sense, and it's another potentially strong bid that might force the hand of Fox to bid strongly and give WWE an upgrade.
And WWE's, the next day rights are still on Hulu for now.
Yes.
And so that already has some level of business relationship between like Disney and the FX brand in some ways, and
Disney owns,
WWE.
I believe, 3/4. Comcast owns 1/4, or right. It might be 2/3, 1/3. In any case, right. And I think
so. There is a
prevailing
relationship
wisdom
there.
now. The prevailing wisdom is that Disney's gonna take full ownership, because I think there's a contract that's coming up where NBC has to decide whether to keep it or not.
I think they're also like merging it into Disney Plus, where it's like it will be its own separate app. It'll be on Disney Plus. If I'm like I read reports,
It's all
of
in Bob
that,
Iger's hands, Gullo. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
I'm looking just at like FX's TV schedule. It seems like they pretty much just show movies.
Yeah.
Especially in
But
prime
we got the
time.
new Justified series coming out soon.
So, but is
that's
that airing on FX or is that on Hulu?
I actually don't know. That might be a Hulu thing. Yeah.
Because
Hulu
I'm just
exclusive.
looking at their schedule, like, and it's obviously the summertime. And like every weeknight, it's almost all like they're showing, Fast and Furious and Thor and Captain America and Spider-Man. Like they're showing, big action movies basically round the clock.
I can't think of the name, Jesse, but the Andrew Garfield series about the Mormons, was that exclusive to like Hulu? I can't remember because that got a lot of praise.
I feel like I always thought that sometimes they would air on FX, like, and then they'd be on Hulu like the next day. But now I feel like they don't even air on FX at all.
I don't have cable though. So.
Yeah, they just go on Hulu directly, and they're called like FX shows, but they're on Hulu. Like the FX is used as a branding mechanism for certain shows.
Under the Banner of Heaven is what I was talking about. Yeah,
Yes.
that show.
I think I watched most of that. I don't know.
I watched it. It was really good, but yeah, I couldn't tell if it was a Hulu exclusive or aired on FX before.
Yes. Okay. Once again, if you want to submit a super chat, we will answer your question before the end of the program. We got a big ruling come down Thursday afternoon, just after I wrote my news report, that the judge in the MLW versus WWE case has decided that the lawsuit will continue. So what's happened here is, so in January 2022, this is when this lawsuit was filed about a year and a half ago. And MLW, for those who are just catching up, is alleging that WWE is a monopoly, has monopoly power, and they interfered, especially in a TV deal that MLW was allegedly about to announce. Stephanie McMahon allegedly spoke with a Tubi executive, and the deal was canceled the night before it was about to be announced. And MLW alleges a number of other ways that WWE has supposedly interfered with MLW's business. So there was one complaint that had flaws in it that the judge said, if you cure this, we'll look at it again. That initial complaint was dismissed. The wrestling media seemed to think that it was all over, but MLW submitted a first amended complaint, which is what it is referred to throughout these documents. It submitted a amended complaint, so it improved its arguments, apparently. And the judge made a decision on Thursday to continue, to not dismiss the lawsuit. So WWE has argued that the lawsuit should be dismissed. They've gone back and forth a few times on this, and the judge made his decision to let it go forward, which means that there will be discovery scheduled soon and probably a prospective trial date set soon. So this raises the likelihood that this is going to be settled. I guess it's ultimately up to WWE's and their lawyers' judgment about what the costs and risks are here. I mean, how confident did they feel in their argument that they could win in a trial? How damaging do they, estimate discovery will be? Will there be information that is, that paints WWE in a negative light or whatever? If they want to avoid that, they might settle, but we'll see what happens here. But for the lawsuit to continue, in order for the judge to deny WWE's motion to dismiss, it had the MLW lawsuit had to meet 4 criteria, which are relevant market, monopoly power, anti-competitive conduct, and antitrust injury. Gullo, are you an expert on the Sherman Antitrust Act?
I mean, a little bit, yeah. We discussed it before, but that was obviously created to stop the monopolies of the Rockefellers and J.P. Morgan and all that were controlling. They were just buying out small competitors, because they had the money and they would use tactics to drive, a business away from those competitors as well.
Right. So one issue that's been argued in this case is, what is the relevant market? So you have to prove, one, that you even have a relevant market here. And MLW is alleging that the relevant market is live pro wrestling TV rights in the United States. NW is trying to argue that that's not a relevant market, that you can't plausibly allege that such a market even exists because there are all these other programs that we compete with, and there's all these other programs that could potentially substitute any pro wrestling content. And the judge has basically said, according to my notes here, W argues that MLW does not sufficiently allege that purchasers of the relevant product, purchasers are TV networks and streaming services, W argues that the purchasers have no reasonably interchangeable content alternatives to wrestling programming. WWE says that the small fraction of media platforms that air pro wrestling content, quote, confirms that the majority of platforms view other content as reasonable alternatives for professional wrestling. WWE also says that to define a relevant market, MLW must plausibly allege that men aged 35 to 44, which is the key demographic that they're pointing out, it skews towards. WWE says that you must plausibly allege that men 35 to 44 only watch pro wrestling. Now, with the addition of AEW Collision, I think that's the case may be stronger. But in any case, 35 to 44-year-olds who are men only watch pro wrestling, and thus networks and streamers must purchase professional wrestling content in order to attract those viewers. Obviously, that's not the case. But the judge disagrees with that argument by WWE. The judge says that although pro wrestling media rights may be a narrow market, the court may reasonably infer from MLW's allegations that other forms of programming content are not economic substitutes for pro wrestling. MLW alleges pro wrestling programming is a niche market segment distinct from, say, comedy, drama, reality, news, or sports shows. And MLW alleges pro wrestling's audience is demographically distinct from the general audience, and that it skews male and towards 35 to 44. So I guess the judge is saying here, hey, look, we can define a pro wrestling media rights market because there's a difference, a distinction that you can make from other types of shows like comedy, drama, sports, reality, news, and that it has a particular demographic that it tends to capture. So that's number one. They're saying, yes, it does have a relevant market. Number two, you have to at least plausibly allege, and again, this is not the judge agreeing that MLW has successfully argued this, but this is the judge saying that MLW has plausibly alleged these four criteria. The court finds that MLW has sufficiently pleaded circumstantial evidence of WWE's monopoly power, alleging that WWE captures 92% of the revenue generated from the sale of media rights for pro wrestling programming. MLW did some calculations here based on TV viewership to argue that, 92% of all the TV rights revenue is being captured by WWE. We know what AEW's deal is worth. They also give WoW credit for, based on its viewership, it gives WoW credit for some sort of media rights revenue, which is probably, in my view, well in excess of what it's actually generating, if anything at all, beyond an ad revenue share. In any case, 92% could be low, could be accurate. If anything, it might even be low. But anyway, number three, anti-competitive conduct. Because the mere possession of monopoly power is not unlawful, an antitrust plaintiff must show a defendant engaged in anti-competitive conduct. So you don't have to, it's not that you just have monopoly power, it's that you have to show that the defendant actually engaged in anti-competitive conduct. Basically, the judge is saying that the exclusivity agreements that WWE has with NBC Universal with Fox, which MLW alleges exist, we haven't seen TV contracts here or anything. Maybe we will in Discovery, I don't know. But MLW alleges that there are exclusivity contracts. The notion that Reels, when it was streamed, and is streamed on Peacock, when Reels was airing MLW Underground, the fact that it didn't air during that stream, the Tuesday 10 o'clock time slot that included MLW Underground, that certainly lends credence to the notion that there is an exclusivity agreement, at least between NBC Universal and WWE. We sort of raised some questions about are there risks around having such exclusivity agreements in these TV rights contracts? In any case, that's number three. Number four, antitrust injury. So MLW has to be plausibly alleged that WWE actually caused antitrust injury. The court finds that MLW has sufficiently alleged antitrust injury, alleging that WWE engaged in exclusionary conduct, including foreclosure of primary content distribution channels and attempted to continue to dominate the pro wrestling media market. So that's basically what's happening there. So it goes on. And like I said, this might lead to a settlement. And if it doesn't, it'll lead to discovery, which I would look forward to researching. And maybe we would get, I don't know if we would get, or if WWE could potentially seal some of this information in Discovery if it got that far. But it seems we may be getting as close as we've ever gotten to actually seeing some of these contracts. So it'll be interesting to follow.
What do you think the end game is? Do you think we'll end up with Court Bauer? He owns WWE now, and UFC. He owns Endeavor.
No, I don't think that Jerry McDevitt will offer Court Bauer will give you WWE ownership if you drop your lawsuit. I don't think that's going to happen, no.
It's going to be like the old wrestling promoter thing. Like, well, what if we send a couple talent to a show? Like anytime Heyman would sue WCW, like here's Arn Anderson for a show. Like
I've heard people speculate that maybe this leads to some negotiation of WWE acquiring MLW. I think that's less likely, but who knows?
Can you clarify what Stephanie McMahon's role is alleged to have been?
Stephanie McMahon allegedly called or spoke with, I don't know who called who, but spoke with a Tubi executive. So Tubi, Gullo, is owned by who?
It's owned by Fox.
What's WWE's relationship with Fox?
Well, obviously SmackDown every Friday night.
Right. And they may or may not have an exclusivity agreement with Fox that would encompass Tubi, I suppose, in the same way that the Peacock, in the same way that MLW was not allowed to air on Peacock as part of the real stream. Stephanie McMahon is alleged to have spoke with a Tubi executive the night before MLW and Tubi were going to announce some sort of distribution deal to put MLW content on Tubi. And Stephanie McMahon spoke with the Tubi executive and allegedly got the deal killed the night before it was going to be announced.
Right. And Stephanie McMahon, of course, is no longer associated with WWE really in any capacity, correct? She's not on the board anymore. She doesn't have an
She's not an executive. She's not on the board. She owns a large amount of stock. She is, behind Vince, the biggest personal owner. Many institutions have more shares than she has, though.
Right. But is it possible that Stephanie's, I don't want to say culpability, but her involvement in this lawsuit perhaps has led to her no longer having a position with the company? It seems more directly tied to Vince's return to power, since she was, hired as the COO or president during Vince's absence. But is it possible to think that her involvement with this potential, Tubi MLW situation, has led to her no longer being associated with the company in any formal capacity?
It's possible, and it couldn't have helped. I tend to think that the more primary factors that led to her no longer being with the company are her political struggles with Vince and maybe all the other things. I wonder how involved she was with selecting Christina Salen, who didn't work out as a CFO. I think there's probably issues at play related to the sexual misconduct allegations, which she left temporarily just before those were made public. I have to think that was a factor in her temporary leave of absence, and his return directly resulted in her leaving the company again.
Right. The timeline of her leaving the company, coming back, and then leaving the company again would seem to suggest it's tied more towards Vince in the power play involved, over control of the company. But I don't know. I just wanted to point out maybe there could be a factor there involving this Tubi lawsuit.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much this is really going to cost them. A lot of money to MLW is not a lot of money to WWE, so I don't know what the real cost of this is, but it doesn't help, right? But I mean, there are allegations here against Vince too, that supposedly Vince directed the then head of WWE Studios to call somebody from Vice and to try to get MLW's relationship with Vice killed when they were airing their one episode special on Vice a couple years ago. There's allegations that seem more thin to me about WWE supposedly interfering with MLW's relationship with Fight, which is apparently repaired enough that they have a new deal now as we sit here. So, yeah. Anything else there? No. I'll take that as a no. Gullo? No?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. Moving on to some TV ratings analysis here. I wanted to look at, we know that WWE TV ratings are up, as indicated for people watching on YouTube by this chart here. They are up a whole 100,000 viewers versus last year on average year to date. But what are the demos within that total audience that are actually up year over year? So what we're looking at here on the screen here are a bunch of charts looking at all the 5 big WWE and AEW TV programs and saying, okay, Q1 and Q2, since we're only through those quarters here. Let's look at last year's Q1 and Q2, basically the first 6 months of last year, 2022. Let's look at that first half of the year versus this almost complete first half of this year and say, what are the demographic differences here in viewership? What's up, what's down? And what we see here is for WWE, whose ratings are up, almost totally across the board. What's up? More than anything. I mean, everything is up. Almost everything is up slightly. Almost everything. We got a couple demos here that are down, even for WWE. But what's up more than anything? Young males, young men, I should say. 18 to 34. Men 18 to 34. NXT is up 67% in that demo. Raw is up 32% in that demo. SmackDown is up 26% in that demo. Dynamite is actually flat, up 2% in that demo. And the demo that is down the least for Rampage is that demo as well. So it sort of suggests to me that, I mean, I don't know. I can't speak for the men 18 to 34 as you can, Jesse. So I'm no longer included in that group.
A class of people who famously, supposedly don't watch cable, right? Young people don't watch cable. Young adults don't watch cable.
You would think the headwinds would be stronger for young viewers than older viewers, certainly.
Right.
And these other demos are up too. I mean, the female demos are up 12%, 17%, 10%, 4%, 5%. Actually down slightly for SmackDown women 35 to 49. But the older half of the male demo for NXT is actually down 14%. For Raw, it's up 15%. For SmackDown, it's up 25%. Can we ascribe a narrative here? Like the first thing that comes to mind for me is that, well, you're producing better content and better storylines that are attracting viewers. Even on Raw, it's not just the bloodline apparently, but even on Raw, up 32%. It tells me that, the core audience, which is, statistically been men in younger demographics, relatively speaking, under 60, under 50 at least, that core audience has in large part returned to W programming.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think just to maybe think of one thing, I think Logan Paul and Bad Bunny both being involved in storylines in WWE so far this year, in doing well, like critically, being in doing in memorable moments and matches and things like that, maybe plays a role in not necessarily like their programs alone drawing huge interest, but helping sell WWE as maybe being cool and relevant to people in that age frame.
And I think Cody's is noteworthy here too.
Yeah, I'm thinking. I think Cody being over. I think Sami Zayn being over. I think the Bloodline, dissolution, getting over. I think that's all factors, but those are in some ways kind of universal factors across the board. I think that's just seen as quality content for WWE fans, so they're responding well to that. But I'm saying specifically 18 to 34, perhaps it's those things. I mean, the NXT number is interesting now. I know that they had kind of lost a lot of 18 to 34 fans over the last few years, so they have room to gain them back. NXT is intentionally aimed at younger people. I know that they have the oldest skewing fan base of the core WWE shows, but the idea behind NXT is to cater towards younger people. They work hard to push younger talent that are in the 18 to 34 demographic range. They give them what WWE views as young and hip gimmicks to try to speak to that demographic. So that's a show that's kind of intentionally aimed at younger viewers, or at least that's trying to. I don't know how successful it's been in the past, but
the median age of NXT viewership is going down. It's almost as young as SmackDown now, which is
right.
I mean, 55.
But it's still the oldest out of the WWE shows, correct?
The WNAW shows, it is now by a slim margin above SmackDown as the oldest.
Do you think a focus on the in-ring product is increasing this 18 to 34? We're seeing like longer matches and more, Gunther matches usually don't disappoint. And, Triple H obviously took a more of an approach on the in-ring product. Do you think that has, for 18 to 34, increasing?
I think that the 18 to 34 demographic, compared to maybe some other demographics, are more online than the older demographics. Obviously, like the 35 to 49, 49-year-olds are still, online people too. Maybe not the 50 plus, maybe not as much, but 18 to 34 are definitely more online, probably more in tuned just by, being active on social media with some of the news behind the scenes, and perhaps are disproportionately people that would be excited for Triple H to take over from Vince McMahon. Maybe they're a little bit more frustrated with Vince McMahon than the older demographics might be, and so they'd respond better to a Triple H led product. Might be something.
And so what do you make of? Look at Dynamite. Dynamite is down in every demo we're looking at here, except for men 18 to 34, which is actually up 2%. Now, this is January to June of 2022 versus January to today of this year. So we're talking about last year, which is a 6-month period that included CM Punk appearing frequently on Dynamite. Because remember, he got injured in June, and then he was absent, and then he was around for like the middle of August and the very, very early part of September. So this is the period last year where CM Punk was present versus a 6-month period in Dynamite where he has definitely not been present. Yet, younger male viewership is very slightly up while these other demos are down. Is there meaning there? Like, what does that mean?
Well, if you look at what does the WWE 1834 data tell us?
Men are watching that show. Well, men in that demo. Well, everybody's watching that show more, almost.
People are watching WWE more, specifically 18 to 34 people in that demographic are watching WWE again. Like you said, kind of regaining some of the audience that they've lost.
A rising tide lifting all boats?
Well, I think part of it might be that people are getting back into wrestling. And that
what's good for WWE is good for AEW in this case.
Not necessarily. It's not as one-to-one as that. But I do think perhaps that people will get enthusiastic about wrestling. Maybe they went a few years without watching it, and they come back and they say, "Oh yeah, like I started watching wrestling again." And maybe they hear about, oh, AEW. I don't really remember that. Maybe they weren't watching WWE when AEW first launched. But it's possible that once you get people kind of back into the wrestling mood, maybe some of them are sampling Dynamite before when they maybe weren't watching wrestling at all a few years ago.
Okay. Any other takeaways here?
I mean, the NXT number will be interesting to see. I think Seth Rollins is going to be on. I think he's wrestling Braun Breaker on Tuesday, which would be kind of an interesting test to see. Seth Rollins as an individual star. Can he?
It's time to sprint towards that TV deal for NXT, which is expiring this September or October.
Yeah, and it's very interesting. I think it's very interesting to see what the plan is long term for NXT, because they seem to be focusing again on less, I guess, on let's get a bunch of new talent on television and more on like let's try to put on like a product that's as good and it has some star power to it. So we're seeing a lot more of your veteran, wrestlers, whether they're people that have always been in NXT or people that are coming in for one-shot deals like Seth Rollins is taking more time. I remember I was looking at the TakeOver card from a few weeks ago, and there's like 4 wrestlers on that TakeOver card that could be considered, trained by the Performance Center. Everyone else was really a veteran from other places. It's starting to feel a little bit like the NXT of old, as opposed to the full blown, like, we can't worry about, really, we're not going to worry about, like, presenting a lot of star power. We're not going to worry about, like, the shows being as awesome as possible. NXT is a training center for talent that we are going to try to push in the future. So it's going to be a lot of green people. It's going to be a lot of people that, were college athletes only a few years ago and have been training for 6 months or less. It's going to be that. It seems like it's shifting more back towards we're trying to put out a serious television product that can do as big of a rating as possible. Now, is that just for TV rights negotiations? Because Nick Khan has said multiple times that he views NXT as a third brand. He views NXT as something that should be seen as very valuable for TV networks to want to have. The ratings have improved, I think, because of that, because they're taking it more seriously, because they're committing more towards an in-ring product and focusing on star power than just getting reps for young wrestlers.
Yeah. Training non-wrestlers to be wrestlers turns out to not be a great TV rights strategy.
Well, everyone's a non-wrestler at some point in time. But putting people on television that are very early in their careers with little experience, and you know, even I, to me, that's not even like the off-putting stuff about NXT. The off-putting stuff about NXT is like the gimmicks and the over-the-top kind of.
Have those gimmicks lessened in these 6 months versus last year's January to June?
I think some of the ones that were really bad have been phased down in favor of a few of the people. And you've seen the talent get phased. And like you still see, Braun Breaker, they're still obviously very high on. They're still high on like Tiffany Stratton, obviously. They're high on the Creed brothers. Some of them they're still, high on, but you're seeing, I think, less and less of the, endless stream of just, here's, a former college football player and they've got some weird NXT generated name and they have some weird gimmick. Seeing kind of, I think, less and less as they're focused more on people with I think they've identified a few of the people with what they view as real star potential, and then everyone else is kind of taking a back seat with, your Apollo Cruzes and your Dijaks and your kind of veteran wrestlers coming back down through NXT, and they're the ones who are feuding with the few real prospects that they feel like they have down there.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
I also feel like the utilization of NXT talent recently over the last 6 months or so on the main roster has probably garnered interest in the product. I mean, Solo Sikoa, NXT, and then he's part of the biggest storyline in pro wrestling. And then now you're seeing like Zoe Stark's going to be in Money in the Bank, and they're utilizing a lot of these recent NXT call-ups in really prominent roles. And I feel like if you're a WWE fan, you're like, well, I should probably watch this because all these people are coming up to the main roster and doing big things, where when it was mostly Vince-led creative, it was, oh, yeah, they came from NXT, but they're on main event mostly. It's okay. I don't have to go. I'm not missing anything.
Right. Okay. And what else we have here? Let me just look at this really briefly. This is the demographic breakdown of the W and AEW shows. Dynamite and Rampage continue to not quite the majority, right? We're now at a point where the majority of all of these shows is outside the demo, largely 50 plus. But AEW and AEW Dynamite and Rampage are a little bit more. Actually, Raw, that's right, and that's consistent. Raw is now has a larger percentage of its viewership within the demo than Rampage, which is consistent with what we've seen in the median age trends. There's that. So I was thinking, if we look at the long range of Raw ratings, which is the most consistent data set that we have, right? Raw has been around since 1993. Raw has, with a few years of exception, been on one network, but it's certainly been in one time slot. Well, the length of it has been changed, but it's been in a similar time slot for 30 years. So we just had the 30th anniversary, right? So I wanted to look at that against sportsmediawatch.com put out two charts here showing the average viewership for the NBA Finals and for the Stanley Cup Finals, and looking at that over almost the same timeline. And looking at how much has that difference changed, because obviously we have TV viewership traditionally just going down across time because of cord cutting and streaming and whatever. And if you look at, okay, let's say, the NBA Finals, well, way back in 93 for the Bulls and the Suns, Charles Barkley versus Michael Jordan, you did have 27 million viewers. And for this year, the Nuggets and the Heat, you had about 12 million viewers. So that's less than half. This is not a consistent decline. It's jumping up and down all over the place, probably depending on matchups or depending on what else is going on in the world and TV. But it is down a lot, right? I guess we could say it is down, in most years, it's around, 12 million, 18 million, which is in some years half of what it was doing in the 90s, which is what I want to look at for WWE. In the case of the Stanley Cup, we had 2.6 million viewers was the average for the Las Vegas versus Florida Stanley Cup final this year, versus in prior years doing 4 or 5 million, sometimes as low as 3 million. So a substantial loss there too, versus Raw now doing about 1.8 million viewers on average year to date, versus in the really hot period, obviously doing as much as 7 million viewers. But in say the the mid 90s, where I don't think of that as a terribly hot period, certainly in the mid 90s, where it's doing 3 million. So almost now double what it's doing today. So anyway, do I draw any strong conclusions from this? I guess the answer is not really. In that only that TV rate, sports TV ratings for, at least in this case, the most important matchup has been similar to the decline in Raw's ratings in some ways. Although this is much more consistent of a decline from, say, 2009 to today. But I did want to make the point, too, that this is a truly remarkable moment in wrestling TV ratings history, I think, that we're seeing here, in that ratings for Raw are up 3%. 3% for Raw. This is based on a median, by the way. Which has basically never happened since 2009. Apparently, ratings were up 8% that year versus the year prior. It was flat in 2014, coinciding, I would note, with the launch of the W Network. But other than that, it's been nothing but negative declines for like 10 years in a row. So this has never happened before. Well, this has not happened in 10 years. Probably since I've been writing about wrestling and doing published work about wrestling. There has never been an increase like this in Raw's TV ratings, which I think is reflective of a genuine increase in popularity.
Yeah, I mean, there's no other way to really look at it, right? Especially when you consider that they're fighting the trends of cable decline, right? Mm-hmm. And you could say, even the last few years, if you go back to they've kind of stopped the bleeding in a lot of ways. Is it possible that around 2020, especially during the pandemic, especially during even the pre-Thunderdome era, where you were just watching that show,
the COVID definitely hurt wrestling ratings in a big way,
right? And I know there wasn't as much stuff happening in people's lives during that period, so maybe that didn't impact television as much as possible. It possibly could have, but you watch those Raws, and just, oh my god, the presentation of the product was so hard. It was such a tough watch, just quiet. You could hear a pin drop during matches and segments, and I do feel like that kind of led us to this is a baseline of people that will literally always watch no matter what.
And it's, by the way, it's up, but it has not recovered to anywhere near the 2019 level, as we can see here. 2.4 million was the median for 2019, and it's only at 1.8 million right now. So it's up, but not up to the pre-pandemic level, certainly.
But does that 1.8, 1.7 million number, roughly, obviously that's a year average. It's oftentimes
it's a median to be clear, but yes.
Yeah. Is that really the baseline of just lifelong WWE fans that are pretty much always going to watch? Did the pandemic rush us into the baseline for what WWE ratings can do? And is that really I don't want to say it's rock bottom, because that gives it more of a negative connotation than I want to kind of go with, but is that your base for these people are going to watch pretty much no matter what? And then this year, because the product has improved and because there's much more enthusiasm and optimism for certain characters and the overall direction of storylines in the company, you've been able to see an increase from what I would consider the bottom baseline.
I think it's was COVID the lowest it could possibly go?
I think COVID accelerated us to especially the period, like I said, pre-Thunderdome, where they were just, you watch the shows and they're so difficult to watch. I implore anybody who has forgotten them, go back and try to watch wrestling like that. It was such a tough watch, and the product was also even lousier than it is now. So
I mean, that makes sense given that big year to year change.
Yeah.
And
Did that just bring us down to this is the base level of people that are going to watch WWE pretty much no matter what? And that's kind of reflected in they didn't lose anyone in 2021, didn't lose anyone in 2022. And now they have room to go up because they're at basically the baseline of these are the absolute hardcore fans that are going to watch no matter what.
Well, I think what happened in 2022 is in the middle of 2021, they went back to touring and ratings somewhat improved. And I think there was sort of a tailwind in those comparisons year over year because you had live fans there in full capacity buildings. So there was a benefit in that way, but there was also still a content problem, Vince, at that time that was offsetting that. And that resulted in what would otherwise be rating better, what would be higher ratings, being lower ratings and being essentially flat ratings. And I think similar happens in 2022, where you have about 6.5 months of that year are benefiting from live audience, whereas the first 6 months of the prior year was not. So I think if you don't have the content problem, there's an increase in 2022 and in probably in 2021 too.
Right.
Okay. Okay. I think that's all I have for today. Unless there's questions, which I don't see any yet. So if you guys have anything else.
Do you think, just thinking about this, leading up to Collision, obviously, there's a story about CM Punk gave out this explosive interview with ESPN, and it's going to be trouble. People are going to be really mad about it. That was the rumor going around the wrestling internet circles, and certain media members like Wade Keller were saying it might be one of those weeks. It's going to be one of those weeks in AEW, which is what Wade said. And of course, the interview dropped. I guess it's up to each individual person whether or not they thought it was a big deal or not. It seemed it was probably more tame than maybe people expected. Maybe we were led to believe. And there was this whole argument about, well, who was telling the media it was a big deal? Who are the people out there that were leaking it and all those things? And who's culpable for that? And I think a lot with this CM Punk reporting and, he goes all the way back to, CM Punk believing that the executive vice presidents were, the Young Bucks were leaking to the media that CM Punk got Colt Cabana fired and things like that. I was thinking that the standard in wrestling media being that nobody is ever sourced for their comments. Nobody is ever, goes on the record and says what they actually think for the most part, especially relative to normal media, sports media in general. Because of all that, we're kind of in this mess where nobody knows who's giving information to anyone, and it leads to people thinking people are gaslighting other people, and we never know who's really responsible for shaping our media narratives at all. It's all just leaked through anonymous sources that are never ever named. And I was just thinking that a lot of this can be cleared up, a lot of this drama, all of everything dating back to CM Punk's meltdown at All Out, and even before that. All of that can be traced back to and certainly be rectified in some ways if people actually went on the record and put their name on stuff. So we wouldn't have to play the guessing game, and we wouldn't have to make up conspiracy theories for who said what or who do we think these sources are. And I just think that becoming the standard in wrestling media to be no one ever has to go on the record, but we'll publish whatever you say anyway, has led to a lot of that unnecessary drama and unnecessary aspects of the wrestling industry. And I think that it's bad for everyone and it's bad for fans because they never quite know who's being responsible for potential misinformation. And the major players in wrestling media are happy to use all those anonymous sources because they want scoops, they want content, even if it means sometimes they're being worked or sometimes they're being misled.
I question how much wrestling is really different from other areas of reporting in this way, especially if we're talking about what I would maybe call insider reporting. And we read portions of the New York Post article from Andrew Marchand today, where he's citing unnamed sources related to a TV deal, and we could speculate whether people involved in WWE were feeding him that information or not, or whatever. Is it that much different than other forms
Obviously,
of media, entertainment, sports reporting?
Obviously, like insider reporting does rely a lot on the similar methods, right?
And I would add too, if you want people to go on the record, I think the incentive in a social media age for people to go on the record is pretty low. When these people, they could just tweet or they could post a Instagram story. If they want to see something on the record, why go through a media outlet to do that, I guess.
And but I think in insider reporting, like if you look at like what Woj does in the NBA or something like that, yes, he's relying a lot on anonymous sources or a source, or just vaguely saying, a source tells us, the Pelicans are looking at trading Zion Williamson or something like that. That does happen, but you also just have way more on the record conversations in sports media. There'll be long stories with people going on the record with whether it's agents, whether it's players themselves, whether it's coaches, whether it's
and that's as a result of interviews. So I don't know. Is that a result of interviews that are being done for the article, or is that a result of like scrums and media access?
Both is, yeah. Certainly, a lot of it comes from in real sports, most athletes and coaches are bound to have to face questions from the media after games and things like that, which gives you a lot more on the record content than we do in wrestling. And
there's no
a lot of it also
out of that for them. Like they are I don't know if it's legally, but
there's contractual obligations. It's in like players' contracts. You have to be presented for the media. If everyone famously remembers Marshawn Lynch's thing where he answered every question by saying, "I'm just here so I don't get fined." Like that's because he had a contract that if he didn't do it, he would be fined.
Yeah. Whereas in wrestling, I mean, the notion of there being press conferences is a relatively new emergence, and the people who are participating in that are just doing it to be cooperative with their employer.
Yeah, and like to Punk's credit in this instance, like Punk went on the record and did a long interview with Mark Raimondi on ESPN, and those are Punk's quotes. We don't have to play the guessing game of who said these things about the Elite, who said these things about Hangman Page. Punk put his name on it. So at least in that one instance, we know. But I also think that there's a lot of it going around where, everyone, whether they're wrestlers, whether they're other people associated with the company, whether it's the bookers, whether it's people in other companies that are being sources for drama in companies. I think all of that is coming into play, and the wrestling fans have absolutely no idea who any of these people are or who's presenting these information. I just think that being the standard for wrestling media has caused a lot of these issues. I don't think you would have the CM Punk accuses the Young Bucks or Hangman Page or whoever of leaking, CM Punk is responsible for Colt Cabana no longer being with the company. That wouldn't happen, I think, in like real sports or in real reporting.
When you say
because
there's accusations, we're talking about fans who are making accusations, as opposed to like Punk alluding to, certainly in the All Out press conference last year, alluding to the EVPs.
Well, Punk accused the Young Bucks of leaking the Colt Cabana rumor to the media. And I think that was largely, why did he do that? Well, he probably really believed it.
Yeah.
And why did he really believe it? Because there were rumors out there that people were reporting that Colt Cabana, there's a feeling backstage that CM Punk got Colt Cabana fired.
I mean, according to that
ESPN
interview, like he believed it following. I mean, according to him, Hangman says to him after the workers' rights face-to-face promo that the reason why he said that is because he believes, according to Punk, Hangman believed that Punk got Cabana removed or fired or demoted or whatever.
Right. And because those comments are not sourced to anyone, CM Punk can create any conspiracy theory or whether it's true or not. I guess we don't still know it's true. I know like people like Dave and Sean have denied that the Young Bucks were the source for that information. But it leaves room for CM Punk or wrestling fans themselves to believe that, because the standard is nobody goes on the record. nobody's name is ever attached to any of these rumors. And every day there's a new story where someone said something, but we don't know who that person is. And it's not an effective way to communicate, and it leads to a lot of unnecessary drama, both for the wrestlers in the wrestling company itself and for fans who are forced to kind of. Part of the reason I think you see a lot of tribalism and you see people taking sides is because there's no clear line between who said what. So it allows people to let their fandom get the best of them when it comes to evaluating something.
Do you think some has to do with the organizations themselves not really acknowledging the rumors and trying to nip them in the bud, much like sports do? Because like the Bills just had this with Stephon Diggs, and they addressed it head on.
All right. How about
what did the Bills do for reference?
Well, the Bills, said Stephon Diggs wasn't at practice, so they were concerned about it. And then he showed up the next day to minicamp, and they said, "Hey, he's here. We talked it out." Josh Allen, Brandon Beane, and
high-profile wide receiver.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Explained the situation. Do we know why Stephon was upset? No, we still do not know that. But
is he mad because of the playoff game?
They addressed it head on, and I don't think like Tony Khan. I don't think he really addressed this situation too head on, as far as what was really going on with Punk and the Bucks and Omega. Yeah,
he's not made comments on the record to the effect of even acknowledging that there was a fight.
How about this? How about this, guys? This is if I had one question to ask you to Tony Khan. This is what I would ask him. Okay, a couple weeks ago, there was a rumor going on. Online, some not super trustworthy news site was pushing this rumor that João Paulinho, who is arguably Fulham's best player, one of Fulham's best players, basically, he had a clause in his contract that's basically if another team agrees to pay a certain amount of money, they can then negotiate with the player directly, so they don't have to haggle over a transfer fee with Fulham. So basically what it was, a rumor that basically said that Paulinho is at risk of leaving Fulham because he has this clause in his contract. It's called a release clause, where if a team offers, I think it was like 40 million pounds, team offers to pay 40 million pounds, they can basically take Paulinho without Fulham really having to negotiate a higher fee. Tony Khan quote tweets the news source that was pushing this rumor and says flatly, there is no reserve clause or there is no release clause in this contract. So this is Tony Khan seeing a false rumor about one of his star players, and he's immediately flatly, putting it out there, absolutely not true. And I think he must see stuff like that about AEW all the time, but he doesn't address it head on like that. He could easily kill a lot of rumors that go along with AEW by doing a very similar method, by seeing it and then quote tweeting and saying that's totally not true. But he almost never does that, despite the fact that he's the same person. But it's because one of them is he's operating in real sports, and one of them is he's in the wacky world of professional wrestling where you just don't do that. And my question for him would be, why don't you do that with wrestling? Because I'm sure
he did that with the Swole story.
Yeah, that Swole's like the only time I was thinking about that. That's like one of the only times he ever did it. But I'm sure he must see it every day with. I mean, like, all
does this case not apply to where he went after Mike Coppinger for saying that about the Wembley attendance?
I think to an extent that's more of like a personal thing. I think.
Or Ariel Helwani or. Whatever.
But I'm talking about like this is like a João Paulinho is like, a star AEW wrestler in the terms of where he is for Fulham. And if there was a rumor about a contract situation that was wrong, which I'm sure happens a lot with AEW wrestlers, why isn't he, out there quashing those rumors? And it's like he conducts himself in two different ways, one for pro wrestling and one for real sports. And the real sports way is much more transparent and much more direct. And in wrestling, it's all kind of part of a show and it's all kind of part of a work. And it's strange, like Gullo mentioned how the Bulls handled the Stephon Diggs situation much more direct than you would see a wrestling company do it. And it's like, this is Tony Khan. He's the same person.
I think the apt comparison for the Fulham player is the TV deal, the rumored $1 billion TV deal. Like, why didn't somebody kill that? At least on background.
I don't know. It's better to get people wondering and guessing in wrestling than it is in real sports. Now, is part of that because
I think from a PR perspective, it leaves what happened was that, oh, they don't have a deal, and then it looks like there's egg on AEW's face.
And the assumption would be, I think the assumption would be, if in real sports you have much more robust, especially soccer or football, which is going to be very extremely well covered by many institutions. Since there's a lot higher of a media coverage standard for what they're producing, there's more of an emphasis on, we got to make sure we squash any rumors because we don't want the Guardian to report it, or we don't want the BBC, or we don't want Sky Sports or the Athletic or whoever your big prestigious media sources for soccer coverage reporting it, as opposed to wrestling. It's like, we don't really care if there's speculation on Fightful Select about this, so we don't feel like we need to address it.
And is wrestling media and wrestling aggregation, according to our conversation with Richard Deitch, is an animal unlike any other, right? Like I know there's football aggregation, but it's not what wrestling aggregation is, where any fact. It was interesting for me to watch how our interview with Tony was aggregated. There was at least one story saying, Tony responds to whether or not there's an exclusivity deal, according to the New York Post, which he didn't answer. He didn't answer the question. Like, his response was not a response. But that was aggregated with a headline that suggested he had some answer to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, aggregation is a major problem across all media. And whenever I listen to prominent sports writers and people who have podcasts and stuff like that, they absolutely hate it. Zach Lowe, who's a very mild-mannered, very highly respected NBA reporter for ESPN, you bring up aggregators to him, and he just blows a gasket, because everyone now has to be super careful with what they say. Everyone has to be super careful with.
I think that's a huge influence in why Tony has gravitated to be on. His on the record self has become the way that it has, which is very guarded.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that comes back to wrestling media not necessarily being the most professional. Wrestling media,
it's a bunch of semi pros and amateurs,
and catering to the lowest common denominator with clickbait headlines, and that kind of aspect of it. So there's a rational reason to that, for sure.
Yeah. I guess my feeling on this stupid drama surrounding the lead up to the ESPN article, I guess one, and maybe this is just my personal interest and bias as somebody who focuses on business, is what somebody's sentiment is, what somebody's concern is. In most cases, I don't think is reportable. It's certainly not something that I'm interested in reading about. Certainly not something that I'm interested in reporting. Just because somebody's worried about an interview that's coming up, it's fine information to have on background to inform your subsequent reporting, I think. But I don't think it's something that needs to be or should be reported, I guess. And secondly, I would say CM Punk being on the record in the ESPN article, it's not a coincidence at all that's with ESPN, as opposed to, he's never going to give a quote on the record to Fightful or to the Observer or to PW Insider. He's going to only give quotes on the record to outlets with a high reach that are going to help them promote something, which is exactly why that interview was happening. I mean, I understand AEW wanted it to be with ESPN for obvious reasons, for that reason.
Mm-hmm. Right. And CM Punk has been, there's allegedly, there's NDAs and stuff regarding the Elite and Punk fight and how much respectively everyone can comment on it. Seems like very little. Obviously, Tony Khan hasn't said a peep about it, despite being asked dozens and dozens of times in various interview settings. This is the closest we've come to someone addressing it.
Yeah.
Right?
And it tells me that the degree to which he addressed it, and even the degree to which Kenny addressed it, which is not deeply, they didn't talk about the details of the fight and what happened, but it tells me that Tony could have said something more substantive than what he has, which would improve or prevent from damaging his relationship with media and fans. not damaging. Damaging is his relationship with media is probably strong, but I think damaging the brand perception of AEW with fans as being, as AEW avoiding reality, avoiding the truth, and to an extent insulting people's intelligence.
I mean, I go back to that Dynamite in Buffalo that happened after the Brawl Out incident, and he got booed for the first time you've ever seen him get booed because he was just talking about the title tournament. He didn't address anything that happened that weekend.
Okay. Anything else?
We got a couple super chats.
Oh, we do. Okay.
Yeah, we got some here. So this is from Tim B. Has cable been reduced to 1998-99 levels yet? I seem to remember that that time being about 62 million cable homes.
I don't know. Obviously, the population has grown, therefore households have grown. I will look this up. I'll go to the next question.
Okay. All right, and our next super chat here is from Nick NP. The next TV levels for each promotion should be linear streaming simulcast, since we don't know what cable will look like in 5 years' time. So it's more of a comment from Nick, a prediction.
I think there's going to be some kind of streaming, some kind of maybe simulcast with, maybe some episodes on the USA Network and Peacock, some episodes being on streaming to widen the reach.
I think that's something that's definitely going to happen in some capacity. Whether it's like every week is going to be simulcast would be interesting to see, but I know particularly NBCU, especially with soccer games that are on USA Network, like the English Premier League, those games are very frequently simulcast, both on Peacock and on USA, so it's on linear and streaming. It wouldn't surprise me if something like that starts happening with Raw, that you can watch Raw on either Peacock or USA.
Yeah. So in 1998, according to the FCC, there were 66.1 million homes. The following year, 67.3 million homes. There are currently, FX and USA are in 74-ish million homes. So more homes today for all the big networks, the big cable networks, than in the Attitude Era. Which I think should inform how we look at those ratings, right? Like, I think other things have competed with television, including streaming and other forms of entertainment, but it's similar coverage, right? It's, if anything, it's higher coverage by several million today versus then. Okay. Anything else?
Yep.
I think that's everything here.
Anything to plug?
I'll be ring announcing this weekend for
maybe next week.
ESW Friday Night Heat. Other than that, light summer so far. So.
Okay. That's in Niagara Falls, right?
Yes, Niagara Falls
area. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. We're gonna do this program at the normal time next week, I think, because I will be going to Forbidden Door like as soon as we're done recording next week. So we'll talk to you then, and I will be back on Wednesday with John Pollock. We'll be talking to Dave Meltzer. Ratings Discourse. See you then.